Welcome to the Mind the Gap webinar. Really appreciate everybody joining. It's great to see everybody coming in. If you don't mind, if you could just drop a note in the chat as you come in, tell us where you're joining us from so I can know whether it's the early morning, the late afternoon, or sometime midday where you're at. We've got folks from all over the place. Joe's out in the Pacific time zone. I'm in Mountain time zone. I see we got Helen and Phil. So you guys are in the UK. It's like what, 3 o'clock out there?
Oh, wow.
You
Thanks for
got your
joining us.
afternoon tea, Phil?
Oh, funny you should say that. Yeah.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah. Iraqi freedom mug as well. So don't think that went so well.
Oh, there you go. Oh, the irony. We got John. It's good to see you. How are you today, man?
I'm doing well. Hey, RJ. Good to see you.
Good. Yeah, you too. How's Wisconsin? Have you guys ditched summer yet, or you still enjoying that heat wave?
It's still hanging on. It's beautiful here though this time of year.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was watching the forecast for the next week, and it's supposed to be in the mid to low 60s during the day and get down to 40 at night. I'm like, oh, this is why I moved to the mountains. Can enjoy fall. All right. Well, I don't have anybody in the waiting room, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks everybody for joining. If this is your first time on the webinar, thank you so much. It's great to have you here. Wherever you're joining us from, we got folks from Wisconsin, California, a couple of folks from Wisconsin, Green Bay and Kenosha. Nice. And from Washington State. So that's pretty cool. Today, our special guest is Joe Estey. Joe, I believe, needs no introduction. I think Joe has been in the industry probably. I don't want to date you, Joe, but I don't want to disrespect your. I don't want to disrespect your experience,
Yeah.
but I think you've been in this industry longer than I've been alive, probably.
Well,
But
yes. Now that didn't make me feel dated at all. I appreciate that.
no, it's probably more a commentary on my young age and how little I've been in this
Oh,
industry.
it's
But for those who don't know, Joe and I have a very interesting connection, and we just found out in at CHOL this past CHOL. Joe and I were chatting, and I was asking him about his experience, and he was asking me about mine and where I was from and all that. So I'm from the Northwest. I'm from Oregon, and my family grew up out there and all that stuff. So I was talking to him about how my grandfather actually worked at oh gosh, I just spaced on the name, Joe.
the Hanford Works, the Hanford.
Hanford. Yeah, that's right. Hanford,
That's right.
the Hanford fuel waste, nuclear waste fuel site
Okay.
in the Tri-Cities, Washington. He was like, "Oh, really? What was his name?" And I was telling him who his name was, and his name was Harlan Pearson. And Joe informed me that Harlan was clarify for me, the supervisor.
He was the shift electrician when I was the shift supervisor in the processing
Yeah.
facility.
Yeah. So my grandfather worked for Joe back in the day, my mom's dad. So it was a fun little connection to make. I got to visit my grandfather when I was in high school and watch him come home from the long days out at Hanford,
Yes.
and kind of talk about the mess it was to come home in and out of the site and
Yeah.
all the safety protocols and stuff like that. So um, anyway, fun little
Harlan was
story
a
about Joe and I.
Harlan was a great hand. He was a terrific person to work with and a real not only interesting character but an educated character. So
Yeah, Yeah. Interesting is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
He was a
Good.
fun guy. So anyway, we will get started, Joe. I don't necessarily have anything specific for you, but if you want to get us kicked off and just
Sure.
talk about your experience and kind of what you do and the insights that you have from your perspective of working with organizations in the energy space, mostly in the nuclear space, right? So
Uh, Actually, it's a pretty diversified field. Nuclear, because of the size of that uh, sector, probably
mhm,
is not as prominent in my day as manufacturing, chemical manufacturing, construction, and things like that has migrated over the years. So I started my career in the nuclear processing field, but then that kind of stretched out with the Westinghouse Electric Corporation into different markets that they served, air brakes and uh, commercial design. I just found myself at a place where people had challenges and they seemed to be similar to the ones other people had elsewhere. And so I would learn a best practice and take it away from that industry and share it with another industry. And that's kind of what today's about is what are some of the best or better practices that no one tool can ever meet for every challenge we face, but what are the list
yeah,
of possibilities for the challenges that we face? As we normally share with people out in the field, the tools that will help keep a line operation reliable and safe are not the same tools always that will help keep a chemical manufacturer safe and reliable. So you got to be able to select the right situation for the right tool, and you know that in your experience, RJ. So I'm going to
yeah.
share some slides, and I really want to make this dialogue centered and start off with a conversation. So if somebody was to ask anybody attending today, what is a single reference or read, meaning a book, that has given you any great benefit over the last couple of months, what are you going to recommend? If there's a book or read in this discipline or topic, what would you recommend?
Go ahead and throw it in the chat, or if you don't mind,
Yeah,
uh,
I like
come
it.
off mute and let us know directly, or turn your camera on and let us know directly.
Well, at Joe's suggestion, I'm reading Checklist Manifesto, which is awesome.
Good.
Yeah, that is a
Good.
good
I'm
one.
so glad,
That is a
Barbara.
good one.
I would say the Field Guide to Understanding Human Error.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, very good.
yeah.
That
Yeah,
was seminal in my start years ago.
Yeah.
yeah. That's what I was going to say as well. As one of those foundation books. Yeah.
Yeah, good, good. Anybody
I've
else? I
read
don't want to cut anybody off, and I'm always enjoying picking up a new read I haven't read yet.
I've read a book recently. It's basically the British police manual on interviewing. It's called Investigative Interviewing, the Conversation Management Approach. And while it's specifically to do with how the police do investigations, um, I could see a lot of how you could transfer it into accident investigations and how to talk to witnesses. And it's specifically about ethical interviewing and how
Mm,
not to pressure somebody, not to put any suggestions into the mind, to keep the whole account as clean as possible and get as much out of them as possible.
excellent. I love the word clean. There's a group that we work with called the Clean Language Institute. They've been instrumental in our national conferences, and it's all been about keeping the conversation sanitized so you don't contaminate it with biases and putting pictures in people's head and having them tell you what you'd like to know. That's good. I appreciate that recommendation, Roger.
Sorry, what was the book?
It's called Investigative Interviewing, the Conversation Management Approach.
Thank you.
And I think it's the fourth edition by now.
Thank you.
Oh, leadership is language. That came to us from David. Great.
Yeah.
Leadership. So that is the
Really great book.
second. That's the second time I heard that recommended. I was at a Tesla Emerging Leadership workshop last week. Several people mentioned that book at that workshop. So obviously a must read. Well, let me share a couple with you that are more that are contemporaneous. And these books would not make sense if all the books you mentioned weren't written first. So these books truly stand on the shoulders of giants. If Decker hadn't written his books and Conklin hadn't written his books, this book probably wouldn't come around. But Amy Edmondson of the psychological safety arena kind of made that a pronounced phrase throughout all industries. Just wrote a book called The Right Kind of Wrong. And we're going to go through some of that content because she has really summarized very well what at least 10 to 12 books I've read said separately. So I would not have had to read those if I were to read this first. And then there's one that just came out from the UK, a gentleman named Niall Downey, and it's a book specific to human error in a variety of different industries, from aviation to healthcare to chemical manufacturing. I did not know it was going to be the gem that it is. It not only is it well written from a reader perspective, but it is definitely well written from a content perspective. And the book is entitled "Oops, Why Things Go Wrong." Oops, Why Things Go Wrong: Understanding and Controlling Error. And again, I don't think the philosophy in the book and the principles he mentioned could have been possible without the legacy of the other authors you've already mentioned having written those. You know, there's been a sea change in the way that we see human error and human nature. And it's been incremental and evolutionary. And now we're at the point in time where it's very practical and people are applying it. Oops, Why Things Go Wrong. Great book, as well as The Right Kind of Wrong. So in saying that, I'm going to put some some dialogue up here. Can you, RJ? Do I have my? I am not what we call a
You
technical wizard when it comes to Zoom. So
you are
can you
good to
see that?
go, Joe.
Good. Okay. So
Yeah.
we're gonna cover a couple of topics this morning. Probably three main topics, and that is what is the true nature of the challenges we currently face, and how are certain organizations helping to master, overcome, or at least fail safely from some of those challenges. Then we're going to move into the potential challenges we're going to face later on. And along the way, we're going to salt and pepper the conversation with a variety of principles that are tied directly to practices. Uh, all too often, and I think in your vocational or professional experience, companies think they have done a good job of addressing an issue by creating a slogan. And they sloganize principles which provide no value to the people who have to apply them. One of the classics in every industry is we need to maintain a questioning attitude. Everybody heard that one? Got to maintain a questioning attitude. Then they never tell you what the questions are. They don't tell you what that attitude ought to be. And so too many folks that I've worked with develop a questionable attitude where they question the things they naturally dislike and are open to doing whatever they would prefer to do anyway. And they believe they've questioned it by just eliminating the things that cause them stress or challenges. It's not what a questioning attitude is. And so we're going to kind of go through some of that. Here's the first conversation starter. And RJ, I'll leave it up to you and your experience as to whether a breakout room would work or whether we can just do this as a general audience. But according
Yeah.
to Dr. John Medina, who teaches up in my area, Washington State, wrote the great book Brain Rules and the subsequent book Brain Rules for Work After COVID. He did a meta-analysis of how COVID and our response to it has changed the workplace forever. And here's what he said, is our response to COVID was the most impactful change to business and the way we work than any other condition or occurrence in the past 200 years. It did things to us philosophically and practically that not even the internet did to us, the cell phone did to us. And again, it wasn't the virus, it was our response to it. So my question would be, what specific changes or challenges resulted in your life or your organization as a result to our response to COVID? What are some of the things that are different?
Well,
I've
I'll
got
get the discussion started. I think just this right here, right? The idea that a community could be built, on virtual learning calls and Zoom platforms and Teams calls and WebEx, and the idea that we can actually have collaborative discussions without being in the same room,
Oh, yes,
to
very good.
me and in my experience was a massive, massive shift.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Phil, great point, Phil. Audio only calls feel outdated. I mean,
oh, that's
how many of you
good.
guys still remember being on a on a conference call and wait, who's trying to talk? Who is that? What?
That's right.
What'd you say? Can you repeat that? There's a bunch of background noise.
No, you are right.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I started listening to this website because of COVID, because it gave us a bit of freedom, being a site covering a whole of the UK, traveling all the time. Suddenly, not doing that, it's what do I fill my days with? And I filled it with this, which is a great way to fill it. And I've managed to hold on to some of that as well, which is great.
Yeah,
that's terrific.
I've got a similar a variation on that story. One of the things I did during lockdown was watch a lot of videos on YouTube of people playing role-playing games. And I've just recently started playing games myself, like tabletop games, but played with people over the computer. And a game I'm signed up for tomorrow is a Delta Green game, where if you haven't heard of that, it's like X-Files crossed with Cthulhu mythos. So you play this government conspiracy that investigates all like these evil forces and tries to stop the old gods from rising and stuff. And specifically this campaign I'm going to be playing in, it starts with a factory explosion that releases some evil forces. So I'm going to be playing it as a chemical safety board accident investigator who's been recruited to the conspiracy and like fights the forces of evil. And I'm going to play it straight because I'll know the questions to ask.
That is good.
There you go.
Roger. That is good.
That's great.
Was that Delta Green?
Yeah.
Because I played Cthulhu and various other things, and that sounds really interesting. We've got Morkborg coming up in a couple of weeks, or Merkburg, as it's correctly pronounced.
I just call it Morkborg because that means, the words dark fort don't really cover what you're getting there, it's
really, it's the only one where we've actually had to stop when the kids have walked in.
Yeah,
there you go. Yeah, I think
Really
I think that's
actually,
more online.
If anybody else wants to join in, there's a couple of places left. I'll put the link in.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, there's been a variety of changes just to kind of show you where surveys and where interviews out in the field have led us in summing up the experiences internationally. There was an organization, Gallup, who did an international survey to see just exactly how COVID has affected the workplace and our home life. And we now know that prior to COVID, in 2018, the majority of people believed that you had to be at work to be working. And we used to think it was a larger number, but the truth is less than 10% of the people thought you could work at home and be productive. And now 56% of 125 million workers believe they don't have to be in the workplace to get work done. 90% of knowledge workers, those who have desk jobs, don't want the restrictions or routines associated with pre-COVID workplaces. That includes the scheduled breaks, the scheduled lunch, the staff meetings. We also know about 50 million workers, particularly in North America, Canada, and the United States. They took a pause, were able to sit at home, really think about what they did for a living, and found out they didn't like what they did for a living. Vocationally and professionally, they wanted to change directions. They didn't just want to change employers to see if the grass was greener in another place. They did not appreciate the work they did on a daily basis because it did not fulfill them. Now, 22% of that 50 million went back to their original employer after they tested the water. But that's a substantial number of folks for the first time in history who changed their vocation and profession. And what they really found out in the surveys was what work means to us as a collective. And people used to go to work and try to find a vocation or a profession that provided meaning. And during COVID, when people took a pause and were at home not working, they realized that the search for meaning and was all too often futile, because not every job provides meaning. Family provides meaning, friends provide meaning, hobbies provide meaning. What we do on our off time provides us more meaning than anything that we're going to do at work in some cases. But all of us, the survey showed, want our work to matter. And we have migrated from finding meaning in work to making sure that we do work that matters. And it's important to do work that matters because what we do ought to count for somebody else. And there's not a single job that's in the workplace that doesn't count in service to somebody else. So as a result, we have found that the challenges we face today in relation not just to COVID and the pandemic, but the environment we've created of constantly changing technology is different than the challenges we faced in the past. So just to kind of go through this a little quickly so that we can get to a question I'd like to ask you. We know if you read some of the books on safety history that much of what we tried to accomplish from 1900 to 1980 in a variety of countries was just improving our competency. We found out that when somebody showed up at the work site, either with a welding rod or a hammer, it didn't mean they knew how to use them. And if they knew how to use them, it didn't mean they knew how to use them productively. So we spent about 8 decades building apprenticeship programs, journeyman programs, vocational programs, professional licensing programs, and we did really good at helping people get better at their knowledge, skills, and ability. In fact, we did so well, some experts say, that for about the next 20 years, from the 80s to the year 2000, many of the safety and reliability programs were based on eliminating complacency and dealing with drift. And as you know, the proper term for complacency does not mean that we're lazy, apathetic, and we don't care. It means that we don't have to care as much as we did, because neurologically speaking now, what our brain does is take something that was difficult and puts it at ease with something. Complacency comes from the Latin word to be at ease with something, not to not care about something. And our brains are built for speed. They are not built for accuracy. We survive as a species because we take something hard and we make it easy. So complacency and drift, we started combating, especially in the 1980s. If you think about Bhopal, the Exxon Valdez, Chernobyl, we started putting more rules, requirements, and regulations in place because we thought somehow burdening people with more to think about was a way to get them to think. And we realized the tragic error that was when it comes to managing mistakes, that rules may inform, but they don't empower. Requirements may provide information on what you need to do, but not what you have to do to get the job done. So for about 20 years, many of the safety and reliability and quality programs were aimed at getting you to stop being complacent, keeping the organization from drifting by reminding individuals what drift looks like. But today, you and I face a uniquely different challenge that we'll talk about in a second. Let's make sure, though, that we understand the word complacency. One of the challenges that we need to correct isn't the challenge we have with human error. The real challenge we have is our nature. I have a friend, Tom Harrison. He is a former nuclear reactor trainer from Knoll reactor programs on the East Coast. Went to Santa Fe recently in New Mexico to help a team of young people who have never been in that vocation attempt to work on a first of a kind, one of a kind project that has not been attempted before. They're recovering radioactive waste in order to safely transport it and trying to clean up some contaminated well water that's been laying out there for about 60 years. And Tom reminds his folks every day that the work you're about to do when you get out there is completely contrary to our nature. None of it was suitable for the way we are as human beings. So when you get out there, you want to make sure you have your hot toolkit handy before you need it, not when you need it. And it's a good reminder that we're not concerned as much with human error as we are with human nature. And there are certain things that are true about human beings as a whole, regardless of where they live. Olivier Saboni, a failure expert that I would strongly recommend, if there's a book written by him, you ought to seek to read it and understand it, will tell you that to sum the root cause up, for most projects he has been affiliated with is that it's not the individual errors that caused the failure. It was the way we make errors because of our nature. And typically, human beings have a tendency to routinely underestimate the challenges we face while overestimating our ability to handle them. Many of us have been involved in projects around the house that were supposed to take a day or a weekend, and they took a lot longer than a weekend. And we went back and forth to the store to get parts that were incorrectly procured in the first place. Would everybody kind of admit that maybe once in a while we have overestimated our ability and underestimated the challenges we face? Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, my big line at whenever I go to Home Depot or the hardware store, they always say, "Did you find everything you need?"
Oh yeah,
And
that's
it's
right.
always, well, I'll find out when I get home.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember taking the water out of service in the house because I was going to remodel the bathroom, new vanities and a new tub but it's only
Yeah.
going to take 8 hours. And then
Yeah.
about 3 days later, I got that look at disdain from the rest of the family members. So,
Yeah.
but we're no different at work than we are at home. We routinely, because human beings first and foremost like control. There's something in us called the control imperative because it uh, helps to guarantee our survival. We don't like to believe that there are certain things that are going to be outside our control. And so we underestimate in order to overestimate because it gives us control. And then in dealing with complacency, you're not going to find probably a better technical book on what complacency looks like than the Cambridge edition of the Neuroscience of Expertise. And it only looks at what happens to the brain when it becomes an expert. And right out of the book, and a summary of thought that I have gathered from others before I read the book, is complacency is a completely natural neurological condition, just like air. Air, as Todd Conklin and Sidney Decker says, is not a psychological choice. Air is a neurological condition. It's what the brain does naturally. It's our brains are built so that we can survive and maintain control. And as soon as I can learn how to tie my shoes quicker, I can move on to other things. As soon as I can learn how to drive a vehicle quicker, I can move on to other things. That's complacency. I'm at ease with something, and regardless of the risk, I feel comfortable doing what I'm doing. So let me give you a scan of somebody who was being taught how to play the piano and didn't have a clue how to strike a key. And then one day woke up and all that thought had been rewired in a different part of the brain. And now what used to be deliberate is now automatic. This is what complacency looks like. On the left-hand side, we're using a lot of wattage. Some experts would say anywhere between 10 to 20 watts to really deliberately think about controlling an execution, striking the key on a piano. But after a while, the brain says, you're wearing out your wattage. There are other things that you need to do. You need to move on from this difficult work to making it more automatic. That is not a choice. That's a neurological condition. And over there on the right-hand side, you see what happens when suddenly you can wake up and play a song on the piano and can't remember when you couldn't play a song on the piano. Complacency is a natural human condition. To fight it, we have to better understand it. But the greatest challenge we have right now is a little different than that. We've gone from a lack of competency to the presence of complacency to where now the greatest challenge most people face internationally, and I can only speak to the ones I've met, is the constant distraction and interruptions we have in our day. We are the first workplace generation, regardless of our age, who is as distracted and as interrupted as anyone has ever been in history. And that distraction does not have to be a conscious distraction to cause a lack of reliability, a lack of focus, and increase the type of injuries. In his book, Deep Work, Why It Is Harder to Think More Deeply About the Things We Do and Why Are We Easily Distracted, Cal Newport points out to certain conditions you and I work under all the time that lead to escalated levels of distraction. On average, internationally speaking, in the workplaces where he has worked, people are distracted about every 3 minutes, not consciously, but certainly unconsciously, which means that it's not without thought. It just originates as a distraction in a different part of the brain and still has a harmful effect in the work we're doing. So one of the reasons why we're distracted is we're constantly checking in, even though we're on a job we should be focused on. When I was a chemical operator some 35 years ago, we went to the plant, we picked up a landline, we called our families at home, and then we didn't think about them the rest of the day. Not because we cared less about our families, but because we couldn't really focus on them because we couldn't check in with them. I work in workplaces now where if I asked any person passing by, hey, what's going on at home? They could tell me. They would give me an update of what's going on a soccer game, what their significant other's doing around the house, what their friend is doing. And not only are we checking in, but we want to see if they're replying too. We're constantly wondering if somebody's getting back to us on that text message, that email. That was not the way the world used to work. We could focus on our task. We would not be distracted by other tasks outside of the work we were doing. Uh, Anything in the chat, RJ, that I need to be aware of, or any questions? Or
No, I think we're up to speed on that. I'm just trying to drop um, all of your great books recommendations. I'm trying to drop that in the chat so everybody has a record of that.
And I meant to say this before, and once again, I was probably distracted in one of those 3-minute episodes. But the entire slides I'm going to give to everybody as best they can be distributed, either by contacting me
Perfect.
directly or giving them to you and have you distribute them. What would be the best way to make
Yeah,
sure?
that'd be awesome.
Would that be okay? I just email them to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then we can host them on the webinar
Yes.
page so that everybody who's subscribed can access them.
Excellent. I'll do that. So think about it. You just went to work. You have a very important job to do, maybe working on an exciter brush, on a generator. Maybe you're laying raceways down as a laborer so that you can put conduit in. Maybe you're an engineer calculating something that's very important for people to use. And then you're getting the check-in every couple of minutes, and you're finding out if people have checked in with you. And then it steadily gets a little worse than that, you see, because there's always a response required. We get to work and we start a day either answering calls, texts, or email. And when I get 5 or 6 emails that's asked me to do something or to remember something, I not only have my task to remember, I have the task of remembering that people ask me to do something. The brain does not discriminate in its memory as to what is a conscious memory I need to focus on and one that's unconscious that's causing me to be interrupted. There is no separation of that. Memory is an activity, it is not a location. And we know that because of that activity, I might be focused on putting out a very important communique, but I'm also thinking about the 5 responses that I have to get back to. And in order to be quick and efficient, we always put a little placekeeper up there in our working memory so that if we get back to the message, we can pick up on it. We never clear the mind as much as we need to on the task we're working on. So we don't have one task. We have a multitude of things we're thinking about. And then, of course, we're bombarded routinely with information. That was not the case just a couple of decades ago. The availability of media now has caused our eyes, according to Dr. John Medina, to constantly search in the world around us for information that might be important to us. So on the left-hand side, think about the newscasters. I grew up in the era, as RJ comfortably reminded, maybe a little before he did, of watching a black and white TV set with Walter Cronkite or a news reporter simply reading the news. There wasn't the weather in the right-hand corner and a banner announcing the newest show coming out and another story being told. We have got at any one time through atmospheric advertising more things bombarding us on a regular basis than we can consciously handle. So our eyes routinely saccade to an area, try to study it, and while we're doing that, we're missing something out, and then missing something else. And so now we've got a habit of searching for information regardless of its importance. Even recently, the TSA in the United States has allowed companies like Zappos to start advertising in the bins at airports. So a moment ago, I didn't have to even look at that bin and I could be free to think of other things. Now I've got this atmosphere of constant advertising that's bombarding me, and I'll either become desensitized to it or overly sensitized to it. And then finally, because of our uh, need to use technology to keep up and the way we currently live our lives, we also have the challenge of not having built a technology metabolic state. Instead, we built insecurity. So let me kind of summarize that. When people, at least in the United States, do not suffer from malnutrition because they lack food. They suffer from malnutrition because they have food, but they don't eat it in a way that metabolizes. So when young people especially are studied and they don't have a set breakfast, lunch, and dinner, their body stores up the fats and sugars, believing it may never eat again. As a result, they're malnourished because their body doesn't properly metabolize the food because it can't trust when it's going to get food. That's unfortunately what experts have said we've done with technology. You see, we all started snacking on technology. We ate the potato chips of cell phones and computers and emails. And as we went through the snacking on technology, we never developed healthy habits like we have with food. And so we built this insecurity. What they have found out at companies like SAS and Google is that if you set your day to a certain calendar, just like you set your times where you eat to a certain calendar, you will always be metabolically more healthy than somebody who doesn't. So in one company, they did a random controlled test where half of their workforce said, just do what you always do, use technology any way you want. The other half agreed voluntarily only to check their email and to check their text and their phone at 7, 11, and 4, just like a food schedule. Well, it surprised everybody in the study, although it was kind of anticipated it might pay off, that those who had a set schedule for the use of technology were 4 times more focused and 22% more productive than those over here in the random control test who didn't have a schedule. And I think it just makes sense. You can prioritize without being distracted because your brain says, hey, don't worry about that. We're going to check that at 11. I don't need to check it at 10. And it stops snacking on technology and has a proper diet for it. Then on the other
Hey, Joe,
side, oh, please.
Joe, a point of clarity on that. Do you know how long it took for those folks to transition into that more productive state?
That is an excellent question. All I know is the study.
Okay,
That's actually in the book "Stolen Focus" by Johann Hari. He
awesome.
studied, yeah. So stolen, and that's one of the slides you'll see later on if you forgot the name. But stolen focus, and the study concluded at 6 months. I did not know if they did a periodic check to see the progress along the way. So that's a great question. I wish I knew the answer to it.
No worries. Thanks.
Okay. The other one, and I don't think this should surprise anybody. I, by the way, heard this from an excellent presenter last a couple of weeks at Tesla, who was talking about the need to get out and actually become part of the environment again when you're working at one of their gigafactories or one of their places where you're very sheltered and kept away from the environment. It used to be we spend a lot more time in nature. And that's not because we like to hug trees or to pet bunnies. We spent time in nature because there really wasn't a choice. We built that choice by saying we'll spend more time at home and in an apartment. There are people in Chicago and New York, I imagine it's probably true in Sydney and London, that spend 80 to 90% of their time indoors. In fact, in some buildings, their restaurants, their dentist, their work location, and their home is all in the same building. And so what happens is we are creatures, according to Dr. John Medina, who are born to be outside, and our brain still think it's out there. Our brain has not changed to where it is more comfortable being inside. It is still looking for the unpredictable conditions in nature. And so what will happen is we become environmentally insulated. We're no longer teaching ourselves how to expect the unexpected because nothing unexpected ever happens in our living room. Nothing unexpected happens dynamically in our kitchen. So as a result, there's a belief that we have become desensitized on the job site because we used to expect the unexpected, but now mentally, we may no longer expect the unexpected unless that's the condition we put ourselves in. So as a result, we're not only distracted and interrupted, but we're also insulated from what could cause us harm, but we're unaware of it. A couple of techniques I've seen some companies use is there was a self-admittedly notorious supervisor up at a hydro project I worked with who never thought about what he was doing to his crew when he interrupted them on the radio. He never thought about they may be working on a very mental acuity task where you got to really focus on what you're doing step by step. Out of nowhere, he would call the team and say, hey, Ron and Sally, when you're done with that, can you give the office a call? Hey, Joe, can you pick up the toolbox when you're done with that? We got another job for you. Now, he didn't think he was causing any harm, but the harm he was causing was now not only do I have to focus on the job I was doing, but I have to put in my working memory, which I'm currently using on the job I'm doing, a little placekeeper that says, make sure I get back to Al and pick up the toolbox. You get a few of those going, and then that mental activity of memory becomes a real challenge. So they taught their crew to clear the mind using this practice. They have clean index cards they put in their left coverall pocket. And anytime on the job, they get a distraction or an interruption, they don't try to memorize it whatsoever. They pull the card out, they write whatever the task is, write whatever the return phone call needs, and then they slip it in their right pocket. And all it's done is trying to clear the mind so I don't have to remember something. I can just remember to read something later on. That has helped them, they said, greatly reduce the level of distractions and interruptions because it was doubtful that that supervisor was ever going to change his practice because he didn't know it was a harmful practice. He might do his best to keep it from happening, but it's a habit. It was better, they said, and told me that it was to create a habit that would help meet the challenge of the habit that he had a hard time breaking. And of course, the other one is developing a set schedule for when we look at things so we're not constantly interrupted and distracted. Now, here is probably the final thing that has kind of crept up on us that has caused our cognitive loading issues to become overloaded. We used to go to work just about 3 decades ago and just had to focus on our job. It was our job to do our job. But then we started doing other people's jobs. There was a way of getting the public to fill in the blank for the labor that other people used to use and be responsible for. When I was a kid, not to sound too dated, but you pulled into a gas station, not only pumped your gas and checked your tires and checked your oil and changed your wipers, you never got out of your car. You had the benefit of not having to think about anything to do with your vehicle. And now we don't have that benefit. In most places, at least in the United States, I don't know if it's true internationally. Maybe you can tell me in Australia, the UK, whose job is it to provide petrol? Is it the person who needs the fill up or is the people at the store?
We generally fill our own in the UK.
Yeah. Yeah. At some point in time, that means you had to learn that. Now, one day we didn't do it, and the next day all of a sudden you have to learn it. I live in Washington State. Oregon, the state south of us, just recently passed a law that they can pump their own gas. They are the most confused people in the world when you see them pull up to a gas pump. Because just because you said they can doesn't mean they know how. And everything about the machine they're working on, they never had to work with, which means they've now had to add to their brain something they didn't used to do. William James said it this way: unlearning and forgetting is as important to the human mind as learning and remembering. The more we have to take in without learning something else, the more it becomes an organization problem. It isn't that our brains can't bring in an infinite amount of information. It's just that we have to put it on the shelf someplace. And so if you constantly are using something because in your daily activity you have to use it, it may not be the most important thing you need to remember, but it's the first thing on the shelf you reach for, which displaces something else on that shelf of the book of learning in your head that you can't reach for more easily. And so it becomes an organization issue in the human head. Then we got unlimited choices. In most countries, at least those that are industrialized, we don't have 3 kinds of bread. We have 47. We don't have 3 types of jam. We have 27. And as you know from Tversky and Kahneman's Think Fast and Slow book, if you've read it, the more choices does not make us better off. In fact, our brains don't like an unlimited amount of choices because that's an unlimited amount of possibilities. That adds to our cognitive loading. As a result, we also have become, in a lot of industrialized countries, our own plumber, our own electrician, our own roofer. There's not a thing that goes wrong around our house that we don't try to fix in most cases. As a result, I have to learn this in order to also use what I know on the job. It just keeps adding to the expertise I have to have in something different. And now we're scanning our own groceries, which was another thing I had to learn without being taught how to do it. All of this leads to the daily downloading of apps where nobody ever gets sent to school on how to download apps. That's something we picked up. And then once you have the app, you also have to learn how to use it. Now, if you just take a look at our recent past and then recent history, you'll notice there's a big difference in our cognitive challenges and those of the past. As a matter of fact, the brain still makes the same 1,000 sensory predictions per second it always has. But let me clarify that just for a second. We have 11 million sensors from the top of our head to the bottom of our feet. Every one of those sensors has a control enunciator in our head to let us know something's going wrong or isn't quite right. We're constantly in a state of prediction. If we weren't, then you could never understand a sentence I was saying because your brain currently is predicting the next word that's going to be said. Everything would be so one at a time as a picture that it wouldn't be a motion picture. It would be a set of still photos, and it would be hard for us to grasp. We're constantly predicting what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're feeling. And that means that those sensors might be going off at any time to alarm us as to what's going on. As a result, we're walking through a store or a market, and we're making 35,000 unconscious choices per day. Unconscious doesn't mean without thought. It means we're thinking with a different part of our brain, but it's still using wattage that the thinking part of our brain can't use because it's all about brain electricity at the end of the day. And if these unconscious choices are stealing wattage away from the other choices, I'm not going to make as good a choice as I could due to the takeaway. You and I, as measured in research, will make about 122 yes and no decisions per day. It used to be we made 60 to 80 yes and no decisions per day. And as a result, we now have a nearly 10-fold increase in the potential choices and decisions made than just 3 decades ago, while our brains have not significantly changed to adjust to our new demands. So the world has changed, but our brain has not. And it's phenomenal that we can do the work we do with the amount of errors we make and still fail safely and not suffer from it in some cases. Now, here's the real challenge for us in the future. In the book, The Battle for Your Brain, written by a lawyer for the Human Rights Commission for the United Nations, who is studying what different countries are doing to try and get their people to focus on their job, it isn't always according to the ethics that we appreciate. It's functional and it works. It just not may be ethical or moral. I'll give you a for instance. In some countries, these are very prominent in the workplace now, And every one of those bands and earbuds are actually some of the most fine-tuned EEGs and data capturing devices for mental activity. They're put there purposely so that when you're driving a truck, the corporate headquarters knows that when you take your mind off the road, it can put it back on by vibrating that band on your head. And it doesn't shock you. It just reminds you your job is to pay attention to the road. So imagine that you're driving, which is a complacent act, and you're trying to pay attention, but you can only do that until your brain gets worn out and wants to go into the default mode network, which is daydreaming, which is mental wandering. Many of us spend about 55% of our day, the experts say, daydreaming or mental wandering. That's how we best solve all problems, the ones we don't know we have right now. But if we're so focused on the task that we have a piece of technology that only causes us to focus on the task, some people think that's a good thing. So in schools, in a couple of Asian countries, they use the smart bands. So the teacher attending to the class can see if your band goes from green, which means focused on the problem you have, to yellow or red, they can remind you to focus back on your task. Does anybody see a downside to managing the mental processes like that?
Phil says yes. I agree with Phil.
Shocked. It's like messing with nature and you're
Yeah.
forcing a function. That's how I see it.
I'm
Well,
actually
and
looking at it going, does this sound like the old time and motion studies?
Yes, exactly. It's total Taylorism. You need to focus on your
Yeah.
task. Only focus on your task. Let managers worry about making things better.
Yeah, and it also takes away the creative processing, right? I mean, the way we handle those decisions, and the reason we're daydreaming is because there are thoughts in our brain that need to be put together and the puzzle needs to be solved. And if we're never allowed to do that for 8 hours a day,
Oh man, can you
talk about
imagine?
the cognitive crash when you get home.
Okay, can you even imagine? I mean, it's hard when you focus on a tough challenge at work for just a few minutes until you have to take a walk or ride a bike or go talk to a
Oh yeah.
colleague over tea or coffee and not focus on the task. That's the way our brains are built. So no, all of that. Judea Pearl, whose son unfortunately was beheaded by terrorists, Danny Pearl, as a journalist, is one of the fathers of the artificial intelligence rulemaking. If you're going to make a machine learn like an adult, what are some of the rules that ought to apply? And here's what I think he insightfully said about this very condition. If we are concerned about machines built to think like adults, I think we should be more concerned about teaching adults to think like machines. I think I might have a unanimous agreement on that.
Yeah, Angela put in the chat, wouldn't you be thinking about always concentrating and having the right wavelengths rather than the content?
I love it. Yes, this is one of those unintended consequences that somebody came up with the best intentions and said, you know what you ought to do? You ought to really focus on your task, and we're going to help you do that by a bit of this Taylorism. And it's not going to work because people aren't like that. Here's what Gary
Well,
Klein.
and
Oh,
I
please.
was I was just going to say, at some point, isn't your brain going to get used to the vibration and just check that out too, right? Because your brain's going to adapt eventually, and it's going to not work.
Oh God, that's so good. Especially think about it. We use checklists for the same reason. Hey, you're going to mind
Yeah.
wander. You're going to be daydreaming. Use this checklist. Well, pretty soon the brain just memorizes the checklist and goes on and does what it does, or the procedure.
Yeah.
It's you got
Yeah.
to do something a little bit more creative than that. One of the
Yeah.
interesting things about human thought is, and if I was going to recommend a book to leadership on how to make decisions, Streetlights and Shadows, written by Gary Klein. You again will see that on a slide later on. Asked, is it really intuition that serves us best, or is it analysis that serves us best? When it comes to a challenging problem, should it be solved intuitively or analytically? And the answer is, it depends. And the real issue is, you really need both. Human beings are not just analytical, and they are not just intuitive. You need both and the proper dose of both if we're going to make better decisions. But if we eliminate the emotional, intuitive content of our decision making by believing analysis trumps it, we become machines that no longer think the way a human adult ought to. So many of you have been exposed to the human performance tools by a variety of other folks who have recommended them either in books or in practice. I know Paradigm does an absolutely great job in setting up the type of tools that need to be used in certain situations. And there's a long list of those tools, no one of which is going to be perfect for every situation. But if you read that list, those are probably much better tools because they actively engage the person doing the work than any type of emanate earbud's going to be or a smart headband's going to be, because it involves me in the decision making. It doesn't punish me for the decisions I'm making. And so, they got task review and the self-checking stop, think, act, review, all the way down the list. If we can get more practiced in these practices, then I think some of those devices are less useful. Any comments on that? Is there some agreement to that?
So one thing that comes to my mind is very simply, these devices are going to, stifle that mind's eye, right?
Yes.
Our ability to envision in our mind what the process is going to result in, or what the potential for that is, and it also stifles innovation.
Yes. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Yeah, we are not a species that was dedicated to be task focused. We're a species that accomplishes tasks by daydreaming, mind wandering, and thinking about other things. Every innovation was at first an error of some type, a deliberate deviation from something we currently were doing. If we define error that way, as a deviation. But you're right. I couldn't agree more.
I mean, that's exactly what I mean. I use that every day in my practice as a safety professional, being able to see the natural progression of an action, based upon obviously, what a typical outcome could potentially be.
Love
right?
it. That's right.
And then and to stifle that with a cognitive monitor, that's going to take away 90% of my ability to function as a safety professional.
That's an excellent point. Well, if you think about it and correlate, and I'm working with a group right now that for the first time is putting together a work planning standard because they never had one. The people who got to do the job just kind of on the site decide how they're going to do it. They've been met with some surprises and things that didn't meet their expectation. So they'd like to help the new people entering the field to do the job more in a consistent way, which is an honorable notion, and it's an important one. There are different kinds of error. One of them is where novelty pays off, and you're really not making a mistake there. You're just pivoting. We'll talk about that in a second. The other one is once you figure out how to bake a cake and you really like the way that cake tastes, you don't mess with it unless you seek an improvement. If the goal is to make sure it's the same way every time you bake it, an error takes you away from the ultimate goal. So in that case, an error is really not innovation. It's more of a deviation, as you know. It all depends on what your outcome is and what you're hoping for. So this group, they're taking a look at the standard way they ought to write work procedures. The fear amongst the crew is that it will rob them of any discretion. So of course, the answer is to make sure the crew doing the work has input into the procedures that are being written. And understanding that not every step they're going to take on the job can be proceduralized. Some of it is going to have to be discretionary. Does all that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Great. Hey, we're going to do a word association game because there's an all-important question I want you to think about here in a second, one that I just learned to ask recently. So I'm going to show you a word. Either write down or keep mentally etched in your mind whatever word comes to your mind next. So, and we all might have a variety of different words. Then I'm going to show you the most common word that was applied to the word I've shown. So first of all, night. Think about a word. And then salt. And then dark. Easy. And the last one, play. So now by word association, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the common answers to those. And just let me know if you had a different one, either in the chat, RJ, or if we'll just kind of see how we did. So night, the number one choice is usually day, but other people say dark. So salt, what was some of the responses? Go ahead and shout it out.
Pepper.
Pepper.
Yep, pepper was the number one response. Dark.
Night.
Light. Yeah, light.
Night.
Easy.
Hard.
Oh, yeah,
Mayans.
night. Oh, say it again. Easy was?
Mayans is a character.
Oh, I love it. That's good. That's terrific. All right, good. Yeah, a lot of people said hard. Now, this one was very interesting. Play. What'd you come up with for the word associated with play?
Bill says fun. I said ground.
Oh, yeah.
Joy, fun, work.
Yeah. Yeah. Psychologists who actually use that usually play, the opposite was work, because some people don't see work as play, and that's a bit depressing. But even more depressing is some people said depression. And so play is where people are lighthearted, enjoying themselves, there's happiness. And over here is the opposite. What's interesting about that is the opposite of play is not work. And the reason is work can be play, especially if you enjoy what you're doing, as I do, and I'm sure many of you do. For a lot of people, the opposite of play and enjoying life is depression, just as the opposite of making mistakes is not the same as building expertise. You see, just because we teach people how to reduce the likelihood of making a mistake does not mean they're becoming more expert at what they're doing. So down here is depression, up there is happiness. Now notice there's kind of a chasm between the two, but there's a middle part to where you're not depressed and you're not happy. You're just kind of there in the middle. That's kind of the same as reducing mistakes and building expertise. When we try to reduce mistakes, all too often we see humans as hazards, just like we talked about with Taylorism and getting people to focus on their task. So reducing mistakes is, you're going to make one, it's going to cost us, we're just going to help you not make those. Whereas when you're building expertise, you see humans as the essential heroes on the job. They're not the hazard, they're the hero. So let me ask you this, and I think we might be able to do this as a larger group. You might have to think about it. I actively encourage you to think about this with the folks you work with. If we need to build expertise, and we all do in the world we live in, what specific resources, activities, or expectations do we use in order to build expertise? What are some things we can do to help people build their expertise?
In the chat, training, coaching, mentoring.
Yes.
Shadowing, mentoring.
Excellent. Yeah. Yeah. And those are all structured, deliberate acts. Please go on.
First thing that comes to my mind is engagement.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we say we need to capitalize on other people's expertise to help build their expertise. We don't give it to them, they build it. Yeah, I love that. Now, what about this one? Reducing mistakes. So what specific resources or activities or expectations does the organization use to try and reduce mistakes?
It's the same list, isn't it?
Yeah, part of it would be mentoring and coaching, but in this case, rather than helping them grow expertise, you're trying to reduce the potential for mistakes, like error likely situations. Yeah. What do we do in that case? beyond the coaching, mentoring? Is there any specific thing you've seen
We got
used to help?
some folks said HPI tools, forcing
Yeah.
functions. Um, in reality, I like this one. In reality, it's more disciplinary action when it has happened.
Oh, yeah, that's
So
the rough
so
one.
making a mistake hurt more.
Ouch. Yeah,
Remove the
that's
person from the problem. And procedures and rules.
oh, yeah, that's kind of so. Notice if we took that second list, especially disciplinary action, procedures, and rules, we might, and research doesn't so, especially with discipline, it may remove the person as a hazard, but it never turns them into a hero. Uh, we might be able to reduce mistakes, but it doesn't build expertise. And what human and organization performance has to do, what's necessary, is we have to build expertise, not just focus on reducing mistakes. It's a very important element. You see, the problem is that all too often we have principles which are slogans because they lack a practice. Like when you get out there, make sure you maintain a questioning attitude. But I need a practice so that I can demonstrate what the principle is about. For me, as a chemical operator years ago, they taught me the questioning attitude was about two questions. Ask what if and how during and before you start a job. So what if that box is heavier than it looks? How would I know that before I picked it up? What if my forklift is rated in kilograms, but what I'm lifting is rated in pounds? How will that affect the lift? What if my ladder is not close enough to that valve when I'm working on it? How am I going to prevent overreaching? For me as an operator, what if and how were the best friends I ever had on the job. And that was because I understood the principle that if I don't use them, I don't have a practice to try and reduce my mistakes and build expertise. But a practice without a principle is just a task. Like you must wear PPE on this job. So PPE is a practice. I don't have a clue why I'm wearing PPE on this job. See, you've never taught me the principle. So I see the practice as any other step in the work I'm doing. It becomes a task, but never a value. I want you to see the use of PPE as a value and not just a task, because we don't leave our values at home. We bring our values to work. And so if you continue to see PPE as an optional choice because it's just one of those steps in your tasks, that's probably not going to be beneficial. You need both a principle and a practice. We have got these principles over here, typically throughout the hop world. People make mistakes all the way to, the way we respond to things matter. The problem is that both context and making mistakes are driven by biology, not psychology. Let me say that again. In the book Brain Energy by Dr. Christopher Palmer, there has been a 40-year study as to why we haven't improved the mental health conditions of people in our society. We've spent money, more than $20 billion in the United States in the last 10 years. And according to the director of the National Institute for Mental Health here, we have spent a lot of money to write some really cool papers by some really smart people and probably haven't helped a single person. That's a pretty condemning thing. And it's all because we have taken a psychological focus and a choice focus as to why people have things like depression, post-traumatic stress syndrome, rather than the fact that it's our biology. You see, primarily, we're biological creatures. It's biology that directs our psychology, which helps us introduce the sociology we have as a society. It's not that biology is not important. Biology is the most important. If you take a look at the recent Swiss cheese studies over in Switzerland, some of you may have heard about this. It's just a news story over here. But because cheese is fermented by biological organisms called bacteria, they wanted to know if oscillating frequencies of music could change the flavor of cheese. And the answer is absolutely. So in the same building, in different cubicles, they play different music, which the biology of the organism used as energy. And hip hop produced a very hearty, earthy tone to the cheese, whereas fusion jazz produced kind of a light cheese, as measured by 200 different random controlled tests and taste tests. Well, it just makes sense. because we do the same thing with our music. You see, we think music is a psychological choice. It starts as a biological condition. The gentleman who used to play bass for Carlos Santana wondered one day, I wonder if people really have a choice in music, or is there something about our biology that has us choose the music we like? Biology, not psychology. And if you ever read his book by Dan Livingston, Your Brain on Music, you'll find out that our brains have different millivolts that are different than your brain. I don't have the same millivoltage in my head you have in your head. And there are 7.2 billion different brains on Earth. The oscillation, the frequency, and the hertz rating of different tones and pitch relate differently to me than they do to you. Now, you got to understand, people don't like to be told it's biology, not psychology, because the number one imperative human beings have is control. We love to believe that we're in complete control of what we do, because the opposite is no control, and that could cause death, injury, or uncertainty. No human likes death, injury, or uncertainty. We have a control imperative to stay in charge of everything. I would like to believe that my own psychological choices keep me in control. Unfortunately, biology has a lot to do with it. People probably remember this. It's kind of worldwide. Was it a blue dress or was it a gold dress? I can't see everybody's reaction, but I think, RJ, do you remember this?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, and then people would say, well, what's wrong with you? You're making the wrong choice. Psychologically, you're getting it.
Yeah.
No, that's not the truth. In fact, in a study done subsequently, they found out it has to do with the type of person you are based on your chronobiology, those little neurons in your head that dictate your biological clock. And so they found out that there are two types of people typically on Earth. And evolutionists would say it's to keep the tribe alive while the other group sleeps or hunts. But the whole point is larks tend to lean biologically more on the cones in our eyes that are used in daylight for high light levels. I spelled levels wrong. And during the day, while owls have stronger eye rods and they're used more in low light levels. So in a subsequent study on the blue versus gold dress, those who were owls saw it more as blue. Those who were larks saw it more as gold, not because they made a psychological choice, but because their eye dictated the type of light and how the brain interpreted the reflection of that light. It has very little to do with our choices and more to do with the way our brains are built. So I want to conclude just briefly with this to have time for questions. In the book, Right Kind of Wrong, Amy does a terrific job of summarizing that not all errors are equal and not all errors can be treated the same way or dealt with the same way. We have the novel context. We're building the Manhattan Project. We are doing the first thing ever in wet chemistry going to dry chemistry. We've never been in this territory before, so it's novel to us. In that case, we don't have a 100% known outcome, and we don't have a 100% known process. We're feeling our ways around in research and experimentation to figure out what the right way might be to do this, what a better way is to do it. Given that context, you really don't make an error when you don't have a guaranteed outcome and a guaranteed known process. You're pivoting. There aren't just two statuses for the work we do, success and failure. There's three. Success, which means we got what we want and the way we wanted it. Failure, which means we didn't get what we want, nor did we do it in the way we expected to do it. And then pivoting is, hey, you didn't have anything guaranteed anyway. You now know what you didn't know a moment ago. You just pivot and you move on. That is not an error. It's predominantly based on our lack of knowledge-based performance mode. There's no way I can have complete success or failure when I lack knowledge. I'm learning as I go along. So research, experimentation, trial and error, all fits into that. So what are some of the things we do in the novel context of our work, where it's brand new to us, to try and minimize the effect of pivoting or error? What's some of the things we do?
Have pilot programs.
Absolutely. Pilot programs are outstanding. And again, that's never a failure. Piloting is pivoting. Anything else that we might do? Think we might not only pilot, but kind of start small, go big.
I was going to have the example cutting down a tree. We cut down a lot of trees, removing trees, starting with a smaller tree, if it's here for removal.
That's excellent. You bet. So in the novel context, air is supposed to be celebrated and rewarded because we call it air, but the truth is we're just trying to figure out what the best way would be to do it. I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm with Sherwin-Williams paint, and I found out this year that titanium blue is going to be the coolest color next year. I got advanced knowledge on that. I want our paint company to come out with the first shade of titanium blue. I go to my researchers and say, you got to come up with titanium blue using your pigments and your oxides and your solvents, and let us know what it looks like when you're done. They put this all together, not quite knowing 100% of the outcome and not using 100% known process, and they end up creating cobalt blue. Now, cobalt blue is a pretty cool color, and I look at it and say, you know what? It's not what we were looking for, but I like it. And serendipitously, you have just by accident taken us to a different place. We're going to celebrate that. We love it. We're not going to condemn it or tell them they were wrong and get back to work. We're going to say, you took us to a great place because you experimented. In addition, you're going to figure out now how to make titanium blue because you pivoted while you were making cobalt blue. So now we got two formulations, cobalt blue and titanium blue. Now here comes the next context, the consistent context, which means now that I know 100% of the outcome I want and 100% of how to get what I want, then I'm no longer in the novel world. I'm in the consistent world. And if I'm going to make an error in this world, is predominantly because I'm doing the jobs. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. I'm doing the job so often, I'm probably in the habit-driven mode. I've made up paint like this forever. Even with the procedure next to my side, I'm probably mixing things here and there. And ultimately, I just might not be paying attention to what I'm doing because I'm at ease with it and I've become complacent or I've drifted in my practice or I've been interrupted or distracted. So if I accidentally put too much of a certain tint and I end up making titanium pink, and that's not exactly what anybody wanted, there's got to be a way to help me not slip like that again. And disciplinary action is probably not the thing that's going to make me better at what I'm doing. What we want to know is why would anybody do that in the first place? Because I had a choice. See, over there is the dry powder. I have to measure it in a cup. I have to pour it into the vat. So what you're telling me is that if we had those in pre-measured amounts, so you'd never have to measure again, you could focus on something else than just measuring. That's what I'm telling you. So the whole point is that type of error is not one we celebrate. That type of error is one we learn from. Why? Because it's consistent, the expectations are set, and when you make a mistake, we just want to be able to fail safely. And the last one is the variable context. I've got two tanks in this paint shop. I'm putting chemicals into tank A. We're going to transfer them for finishing into tank B. And I normally hit a pump, which isn't working today. And so I talk to my crewmates and find out that we can ladle the chemicals out or siphon them out with Tygon tubing into a bucket and then carry them over to the tank. The chances are I'm probably going to make a mistake at some point in time. As James Reason would say, given that job to be done in this way, under these conditions, the mistake's going to occur right about here. It could be a lifting error, a tipping error, whatever, I might make a mistake. So what would I do to try and reduce the possibility or the harm from the mistake? Well, I'd use one of those hot tools to stop, think, act, review, ask what, if, and how. Make sure I have a checklist so I don't forget the steps necessary to do it. Whatever that is, in a variable context, the mistake is going to come from a rule in my head being stronger than the rule in the workplace and maybe being asleep at the wheel while I'm doing it. So according to Amy Edmondson, which I love, in the summary of this concept, is not all mistakes are equal, but all mistakes are an opportunity to learn from if we understand the proper context. So given the conversation, does that make sense? And did we connect the dots?
Any questions? Either throw them in the chat or go ahead and pop on, come off mute. That was great, Joe. Makes sense to me. It connected the dots for me, for sure.
I appreciate it. Let me get the stops here so I can see the faces. So hopefully those are just some thoughts. Hopefully they were in cue with some of your experiences and things that you've been thinking about. According to Dr. Sanjay Sarma from MIT, who wrote a great book on adult ed called Grasp: The Art of Learning, there's only one reason to learn after formal education, and that's to promote curiosity. Nobody can fill in anybody else's blank. Your blanks are different than my blank. But if we promote curiosity, you'll be curious enough to go out and learn it on your own. So hopefully I've given you some things to kind of promote the continued curiosity you have. If you didn't have it already, you wouldn't be here this morning. So I want to thank you for attending. I want to thank you for being here this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody have any questions for Joe? We've got about 8 minutes. And if there's some continued discussion, we can hang on, but I think Joe's got a hard stop right here at 9:30 or whatever time it is in your time zone. So he's got some folks he's got to get to. So we got about 8 minutes left with Joe.
Just want to say fantastic content, Joe, brilliant, and my bill for books has now gone through the roof. So, but
I was thinking the same, Phil. Yeah.
Well, I hope you enjoy them as much as I did. I'm sure you will. And thank you very much for that.
I'm just trying to figure out how in the world I'm going to have time to read all these books.
What about Daniel Kahneman? What are your views on his work?
Love his work. You know, I think it's been criticized unfairly by some folks recently, only because there's always contrarians, right?
Yeah.
You know, Daniel Pink gets attacked, Simon Sinek gets attacked. The truth is he was the one that laid out that we have biases, and we have biases that are natural, and you know, condemning people for those biases isn't probably very useful. Part of who we are.
Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you.
I think it's unfortunate that people that seem to think it's necessary to attack other people.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I totally agree.
I mean, I've read Gary Klein's stuff and Kahneman stuff, and maybe sort of grew up on it. No. But when you're in the consulting game, you stake out a territory, and that's your brand, you know. And I don't really find any use in polemicizing over this stuff.
I could not agree more. That was very well stated. As a matter of fact,
I want to thank you, Joe, for defending defending the territory on complacency. I just can't do enough all by myself to get people to stop talking about complacency. And the way you describe it as a you know, I call it psychological economics. I mean, your brain's going to go for efficiency all the time, and it's not a choice. And I use the same technique. I didn't, when I'm forced to do training years ago, the scans. Your brain didn't decide to pay less attention. You didn't decide to pay less attention to that. Your brain reorganized that behavior and does it completely differently, and you can't not do it that way. And if people could just get their heads around that and stop talking about complacency, because if you think about it, it's circular. Well, why did they make a mistake? Because they were complacent. Well, how'd you know they were complacent? Because they made a mistake.
I love it.
You just go nowhere. And if you think about it as the way you put it, biology, not psychology, not a choice, not a deficiency, not laziness, it gets the conversation off blame and to somewhere else. So I like the way you did that, and keep doing that.
I appreciate it. Hey, thank you very much, and keep doing what you're doing. I think it's important to get that voice out there. That's good. Very good. Yeah,
Joe, I
Dr.
did have.
Oh, please.
Oh, I was going to say on that conversation around complacency, one of the burning questions in my mind when you first started with that is, and William Brown on this great opportunity, is how do we take back that hijacked word, right? Because complacency has been hijacked, like you pointed out, right? And it has now been attributed to a value statement. Right. So when I hear people say, "Oh, they just got complacent," they're attaching value to it and not stating fact, right? Like as in complacency is a negative thing and we have control over it.
Right.
So do we need to pivot away from that word, or do we need to push on the education of the true definition, get back to the true definition of complacency?
What does everybody else think? I think we need to. It's like error. We have abused the word error for so long when we actually mean we just did something a different way, or like local rationality decisions or whatever. We use that word, but that's not what that word means. And so it's going to be hard. The whole behavior-based safety, which by the way I taught throughout the '90s for Westinghouse and Rockwell. That whole movement was about reducing complacency, right? You watch somebody, you go up to them, and you tell them, "Hey, you're being complacent." And like Dr. Christopher Palmer said in the book Brain Energy, just because we now have this new theory about the mind, biology leads to psychology, does not mean all the other theories were wrong. We build theories on theories. You can accept those theories without criticizing the people who had them. So BBS, maybe the complacency was seen as a label for people's behavior, and it was condemnatory. Well, to a point, they had a point that people weren't paying attention to the error prevention tools for complacency. That if on a job you're going to be at ease with it, you might want to make sure you have a tool so you're not that at ease with it and you're focused. There wasn't a problem with that. I just think we have just abused it to the point it doesn't have any meaning. Yeah. So that's tough. It's going to be tough as it is to try and correct the word for error.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, just keep preaching the good word, I guess.
That's right. That's right, RJ. It's the best we can do.
Good. Okay. Well, we've got a couple more minutes. Roger, do you have a question?
Since book recommendations have been kind of the theme of this, I was wondering what are the best books about how to actually do an accident investigation?
Oh, wow, man. Well, you always got you've got the pre-accident investigation with Todd Conklin's. You've got, I think, that is a deep and wide subject and one of my favorites because I love incident evaluations. That's what we call them here is an incident evaluation. The reason is most of the workplaces I work in have an allergic reaction to the word investigation. They automatically assume that you're there to nail someone and you're there looking for complicity, whereas we're actually there to evaluate the conditions that led to the undesirable outcome. So I have never read one book that I think answers it. Technically speaking, Root Cause Analysis by Robert Latino, Bob Latino. So Root Cause Analysis. His father was very active in NASA and other programs and studying root cause analysis, wrote a book on it. He'd be a great one to reference. RJ, who are the other folks at Cole that, you've got, think of anybody else?
One of the things that Paradigm tries to do is take some of the concepts of learning teams, right? The more relaxed kind of learning model and blend that into the investigation model. So some of the newest books on learning teams, Bob and Andrea's book, Todd's book.
Yeah, very good.
And take those concepts of collaboration and blend those into an investigation model is probably the best way if you're going to have to do investigations.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm glad you brought that up. That's excellent. And Bob and Andrea's book is outstanding.
What book is that?
It's operational learning, I think. Is that right? Was it the Guide to
Yes.
Operational Learning?
Yeah, Field Guide to Operational Learning or something like that by Bob Edwards and Andrea Baker. Yeah, Bob's Guide to Operational Learning. There you go.
Yeah,
nice job, John. Way to save the day. John's our A+ student out of Davy Tree there.
I love it. You know, one book that kind of, as a cause analyst and learning team leader, one of the book that was formative in my early career was written by Eric Hallnagel called Accident Prevention and Barriers. I know it's not one of his best-selling books because it's very technical, but it really does a good job of, so Accident Prevention and Barriers, or Barriers and Accident Prevention by Hallnagel, was really a great book.
Yeah, John, you've done a lot of work in this area. Is there one that you've leaned on pretty heavily?
Bob's Guide.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, and I've just held up. I lean on well, stuff from Paradigm. You know, when I spend time with you guys. Yeah, and then just bits. The material put out by the Forest Service.
Oh yeah.
It's great with their facilitated learning analysis. All of that is available for free. Online.
Yeah, the Dave Christensen's kind of wheelhouse there. That's good stuff. Cool. Joe, thank you so much for an hour and a half of your time today. I know you've got a crazy busy day. It was excellent, great content, and it's always great catching up with you.
Yeah,
and great to see you again.
Great seeing you. It'll make my day being able to have this kind of a thing started. So
yeah.
Thank you, Joe.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Stuff.
Thank you, folks. And we look forward to seeing you all next month.
Got it.
Bye. Right on. Thank you.
See you, Roger.
How you doing, RJ? Hey, RJ, you gonna be able to stay on for just a second?
Yeah, that's great. That's perfect.
Hey, yeah, so I did send you that email back about working on next month's